Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this February 16, 2015 edition of Nightcast. We have a special report on Germany, the EU, the Eurozone tonight. I'd almost like to make it a separate report, but we're going to include it in the program tonight with the day's current news, which begins with news on the truce, the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine, which is looking increasingly fragile, just a day after it was meant to start. The Ukrainian military command said pro-Russian rebels had attacked 112 times since early on yesterday, Sunday, and the rebels who hold Donetsk airport accused Ukrainian forces of shelling it. The BBC's international correspondent Ian Pennell reports.
This is what a scorched earth policy actually looks like, barely recognizable for what it is. Donetsk International Airport. A symbol of the searing intensity of the war in Ukraine that's supposed to have stopped. A battle that pictures a Western-leaning government against a rebel army that turns to its Russian neighbor. So this is day 2 of a shaky ceasefire, and heavy weapons are supposed to be pulled back. But that isn't what's happening here. The rebel defense minister says he'll only pull his forces back when he has proof that the Ukrainians on this front line have withdrawn theirs. But the issue that threatens this peace deal isn't that the guns haven't pulled back here, it's that they're still firing. This is supposed to be day 2 of the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine, and as we've been hearing yet again, the peace has not settled in. We've been hearing the consistent sound of artillery fired. There's another one. Most of it appears to be outgoing. But what the people of the Donetsk People's Republic are saying is that they're suppressing fire. Stay together. Run! The Ukrainians insist they haven't broken the truce, accusing the rebels of shelling their own territory.
Непонятно, чего делают. Ну вот вы слышите сами.
But that's firing out.
Это не исходящий раз. Нет, входящий и исходящий.
No, it's in and out. The defense minister says he's trying to stop the enemy from firing at their positions.
Мы работаем только на.
The last effort to stop this war failed. Today's peace deal has held in most places, but there's a clear risk that what we're watching is history repeating itself. Ian Pennell, BBC News, at Donetsk International Airport.
One of the speakers on the panel of the free speech debate in Copenhagen, which was targeted by gunmen, says that she was aware of the risk of attack on the event. But Inna Shevchenko, who is a feminist political activist, told Newsnight that when she heard the shots, she initially thought that it could be a joke.
I was in the middle of my speech and I just mentioned the point that very often in Europe we have an illusion that we can fully enjoy freedom of speech. And then I said that sometimes, well, always there will be opinion that, of course, we do agree with the idea of freedom of speech, but. And why do we say but when we talk about freedom of speech? And then the shots started. And I think that ironically we can say that that was a huge but for celebration of freedom of speech.
The shooting started. I mean, what did you think as you heard it? Did you realize what was going on?
You know, I think that because of developing this sense of being prepared for this kind of attack any moment, because of experience and because of permanent, constant death threats that you receive, I think that I can say that I thought something could happen at one of the events or just simply any day. And when the shots started, I thought, well, maybe it's a joke or it's a sound of, I don't know, fireworks or something else. And I think that exactly the same people were thinking, and nobody really reacted in the first seconds. I stopped talking, and I realized that, okay, that was a gun. And I was the first who fell down on the floor under the stage. And then people were falling on the floor, hiding under the tables. They were covering themselves with jackets, just desperately trying to protect themselves this way.
Time.
So, friends, there was the incident that happened during the free speech debate in Copenhagen. More news of a nature of war and rumors of war. Egyptian planes have attacked so-called Islamic State IS targets in Libya as a response to the beheading of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christian hostages. F-16 jets took off to strike training camps and weapon stores in Derna, in a county or in a country where Islamist extremists are seen as a growing threat. Orla Gorin has this report from the village in Minya, which was home to 13 of the 21 professing Christians murdered by IS.
Under cover of darkness, Egyptian warplanes setting out for a bombing mission inside Libya. Swift retribution for the beheading of Coptic Christians and the opening of a new battlefront in the Middle East. State TV aired what it said was cockpit video showing Egyptian missiles hitting Islamic State targets. One more Arab nation now fighting the extremists. Hours after the dawn strikes, a president in mourning, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, comes to offer his condolences to the Coptic Pope. In the village of Al-Ur, grief echoed through the streets. This small community has lost a total of 13 men. Faransha Atiyah cries out for her beloved ones. 5 of her relatives are gone.
And friends, hopefully,
in a nearby house,
hopefully that will help all of us who are instructed by Jesus Christ and recognize that instruction in Luke 21, verse 36, to watch and pray regarding the events of the world that relate to the seals of Revelation. As you see pictured here, the first 4 of those seals are depicted by 4 horses. The first one being a white horse that Jesus Christ described in plain language to be religious deception. Men saying that Christ has come and yet deceiving many, saying that Christ is Christ, in fact, but deceiving the many. And the second horse, a red horse, depicted by the second seal depicted by a red horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as war and rumors of war. Most of the stories we've been seeing so far tonight relate to this second seal, the red horse, war and rumors of war, leading to another round of world war eventually. And the third seal, the black horse, depicted by a black horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as famine. And the fourth seal depicted by a pale horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language to be primarily disease epidemics, loimos in the Greek. And he also said that between the third seal and the fifth seal there would be terike, trouble, not the mega trouble of the fifth seal, but trouble, and seismos, seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. We've been seeing a lot of that, and as we see more and more of it around the world in diverse, different places, that's a trigger and a sign to us that we're getting very close to the fifth seal, which will be starts a clock rolling when the fifth seal begins, the Great Tribulation. And I might say more about that later, but I want to go on for the moment to our story. We've got, as I mentioned at the opening, we've got a special report on Germany, the EU, and the Eurozone that I want to be able to give to you tonight. And this next story, friends, a very revealing story. A captured Islamic State suicide bomber says, "I am so sorry." A captured Islamic State suicide bomber has told the BBC that the group actively recruits teenagers as young as 14 to carry out attacks in Iraq. This young man you'll see in this video was, I believe, 17 years old. John Simpson has this report from Iraq's capital city. The lead-in says on its newfound optimism. Let's see why.
This is turning into a different city. The nighttime curfew, which lasted for years, has finally been lifted, and people can enjoy themselves like they used to years ago. Still, everyone knows it's not 100% safe. Islamic State, self-styled, marked the lifting of the curfew with suicide bombings. But the police are getting better at stopping them. And this is a suicide bomber just captured, Zakaria al-Rawi. We were given remarkable access to film him. He's only 17, just a boy, homeless and vulnerable. IS showed him how to wear an explosives vest with his thumb on the trigger. They promised me I'd go straight to heaven, he says. The majority of recruits are like me or younger.
Younger? How young?
14, 15, 16 or 17 like me.
And you were fully prepared to kill women and children as well as men?
Yes, sir, he says.
Why are you crying now?
Because I'm so sorry for this, he says.
You're ashamed of what you were going to do?
Yes, sir. There's no sign that Zakaria is saying this because he's been mistreated. Now he'll serve time in prison. After that, he could still have a decent future. Police in Baghdad have also had some success against car bombs. Each checkpoint has a list of suspicious vehicles that the police are on the lookout for. Brigadier Saad Man of the Interior Ministry is remarkably upbeat. Are you winning this war?
I'm full confident to say yes, we are winning the war. And we have hope and we have faith that this year will be the end of Daesh in Iraq.
A few months ago, there were still fears that IS, or Daesh, might capture Baghdad itself. You don't hear that now, and IS is being pushed back in the country as a whole. But the new Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, is well aware that Iraq's third city, Mosul, is still in IS hands.
I can announce this. We have already started the preparation for the liberation of Mosul. We've already started this. So we are assigning certain of our army divisions to that task and other security forces.
Mosul will be back in your hands by the end of the year.
I hope so. We're working even before that.
Is his optimism justified? After all, last week IS scored a victory in western Iraq. But it isn't as strong as it was, while the government forces are stronger. For the first time in years, there are reasons to be optimistic here. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
Friends, the Japan, while that story was going, the Japan Meteorological Agency, JMA, just released a tsunami warning following a magnitude 6.9 earthquake that just struck minutes ago somewhere around northern Japan. You can see, let's see, northern Japan and the Honshu Islands. You can see on this map that Japan, northern part of Japan, is directly east of the border there between Russia and North Korea. And the Honshu Islands, let me see, do we have, well, I don't have that, but we have this from the Japanese earthquake website showing the epicenter there just east of the northern portion of Japan, as you can see. And the JMA, the Japanese Meteorological Agency, is advising all persons in the coastal areas to evacuate, to leave their homes. You know, Japan is still in recovery, friends, following the devastating 8.9 magnitude earthquake of 2011, just 4 years ago. Now, this just in says that local fishermen in several northern Japan seaports said that a tsunami around 10 centimeters struck Iwate Prefecture, according to Japanese broadcaster NHK. Iwate Prefecture is largely rural with a total population of around just over 1.3 million. This report says that the nuclear plant in the area was not damaged, but local train lines are suspending operations until further notice. 6.9. Not quite 8.9, but pretty major earthquake there. All right, friends, I told you I wanted to give you a special report tonight, and this is a report regarding Germany and largely its Chancellor Angela Merkel, from a report from the Stratford Files. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, accompanied by French President François Hollande, met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on February 6. Then she met with U.S. President Barack Obama on February 9. The primary subject was Ukraine, but the first issue discussed at the news conference following the meeting with President Obama was Greece. Greece and Ukraine are not linked in the American mind. They are linked in the German mind because both are indicators of Germany's new role in the world, of Germany's discomfort with it, and Germany's discomfort with it. It's interesting to consider how far Germany has come in a rather short time. When Merkel took office in 2005, she became Chancellor of a Germany that was at peace, in a European Union that was united. Germany had put its demands behind it, embedding itself in a Europe where it could be both prosperous and free of the geopolitical burdens that had led it into such dark places. If not the memory, then the fear of Germany had subsided in Europe. The Soviet Union was gone, and Russia was in the process of trying to recover from the worst consequences of that collapse. The primary issue in the European Union was what hurdles nations clamoring to enter the Union would have to overcome in order to become members. Germany was in a rare position given its history. it was in a place of comfort, safety, and international collegiality. The world that Merkel faces today is startlingly different. The European Union is in a deep crisis. Many blame Germany for that crisis, arguing that its aggressive export policies and demands for austerity were self-serving and planted the seeds of the crisis. It's charged with having used the euro to serve its own interest and with shaping EU policy to protect its own corporations. And I've said for a long time, friends, that the euro really, with Helmut Kohl promoting that for over a decade, and it finally becoming a reality toward the last couple of years of his being in power. We saw the euro for the first couple of years be circulated in Europe just on the books only. And then in late 2000, early 2001, they actually began to coin it and print the paper, the money, to be circulated. And let's go back to the article, the Stratford Files article. The vision of a benign Germany has evaporated in much of Europe. Fairly or unfairly, in many places, old images of Germany have re-emerged. If not in the center of many countries, then certainly on the growing margins. And, friends, I was going to make a point I wanted to underscore, and let me just pause again and interject that point I was making when I pointed out that toward the end of Helmut Kohl's being in power, as he pushed for a single currency for Europe, and then they coined the euro and began to circulate it after he's out of office now in early 2001, but he pushed for it. And really, what the euro is, it's the German mark with a different name on it. And Germany was the first to convert its currency over to the euro. Really, they just changed the name of their currency and reprinted, a different kind of paper for it and coinage for it, and talked other countries into doing the same, of converting their national currency over to the German mark, now called the euro. Well, that's my way of putting it. Back to this article now. In a real, if limited way, Germany has become the country that other Europeans fear. Few countries are clamoring for membership in the European Union, and current members have little appetite for expanding the bloc's boundaries. At the same time, the peace that Germany had craved is in jeopardy. Quite a different picture than when the euro first came out, and wow, everybody was jumping into becoming part of the Eurozone, converting their currency over to the euro, their national currency to the euro for these many 17, 18 countries now. But now we're in a different situation altogether. Back to this article that says events in Ukraine have aroused Russian fears of the West, and Russia has annexed Crimea and supported an insurgency in eastern Ukraine. Russia's actions have sparked the United States' fears of the re-emergence of a Russian hegemon, and the United States is discussing arming the Ukrainians and pre-positioning weapons for American troops in the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. The Russians are predicting dire consequences, and some U.S. senators are wanting to arm the Ukrainians. If it is too much to say that Merkel's world is collapsing, it's not too much to say that her world and Germany's have been reshaped in ways that would have been inconceivable in 2005 when she first came into office. The confluence of financial crisis in Europe that has led to dramatic increase in nationalism, both in the way nations act and in the way citizens think with the threat of war in Ukraine, has transformed Germany's world. Germany's goal has been to avoid taking a leading political or military role in Europe. The current situation has made this impossible. The European financial crisis, now 7 years old, has long ceased being primarily an economic problem and is now a political one. And I want to pause from the article just for a moment, friends, and remind you that Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong told us there were 3 things to watch for in the coming together of a United States of Europe. One would involve a political union. Another, actually, he mentioned first it would involve a single currency union, an economic union, and then a political union. And so that's exactly what's happened. First of all, the euro begins to catch on, and many countries joined the Eurozone by converting their currency over to the euro, and it becoming a widely circulated single currency in Europe, with struggles nonetheless, but those struggles may resolve eventually, especially as they try to pull together a political union. The second thing Mr. Armstrong said the United States of Europe would need an economic union, a political union. And of course that political union may really, since politically the European Union, the United States of Europe, is pictured by the 10 toes of the great image from Daniel 2, chapter 2, where those toes are on feet, where the toes and the feet are made of iron mixed with miry clay, which is a mixture that does not stick or hold together. So a crisis may have to come along that will cause this political union. That's the second of 3 elements needed for the United States of Europe to form into what equates to become the 5th seal becoming reality with the Great Tribulation. And that is, the third thing is a military union. So those 2 of the things are coming into play before our eyes. And then somehow they will pull together a military union out of all this. Germany already has a developing army, which has been amazing to me that the Allies would stand by and watch and see Germany build an army following Germany's unconditional surrender after World War II. You know, you would think that both Germany and Japan would have no military, would be allowed to have no military at all. And yet they do, in growing military. But back to this article, the Ukrainian crisis places Germany in the extraordinarily uncomfortable position at the present for Germany of playing a leading role in keeping a political problem from turning into a military one. And there's that third element, the military union. It's important to understand the twin problems confronting Germany. On the one hand, Germany is trying to hold the European Union together. On the other hand, it wants to make certain that Germany will not bear the burden of maintaining that unity. In Ukraine, Germany was an early supporter of the demonstrations that gave rise to the current government in Ukraine. I don't think the Germans expected the Russian or U.S. responses, and they don't want to partake in any military reaction to Russia. At the same time, Germany does not want to back away from support for the government in Ukraine. There's a common contradiction inherent in German strategy. The Germans do not want to come across as assertive or threatening, yet they are taking positions that are both. In the European crisis, it is Germany that is most rigid not only on the Greek question, but also on the general question of Southern Europe and its catastrophic unemployment situation. In Ukraine, Berlin supports Kiev and thus opposes the Russians, but does not want to draw any obvious conclusions. The European crisis and the European crisis are mirror images. Let me read that part again for you, friends. The European crisis and the Ukrainian crisis are mirror images. In Europe, Germany is playing a leading but aggressive role. In Ukraine, it's playing a leading but conciliatory role. What is most important is that in both cases, Germany has been forced, more by circumstance than by policy, to play leading roles. You know, and friends, if you stop and think about it, how this article relates to the God of this world and what the Creator God of heaven allows the God of this world to do in order to fulfill prophecy. Back to this article, the leading roles that Germany is being forced to play, being put in that position, being lifted up into leading roles, and being done so by the manipulations of the God of this world, which the God of heaven allows to do and watches to make sure it's working in conformity with prophecy, as God will have things work out. But he allows Satan to have at it, and Satan, plays right into the hands of God, our Creator, by doing what God knows he'll do, because he's an enemy of God, and he knows that the God of this world will act like an enemy of God. And even God himself plans to use, as he says, he plans to use the Assyrians, the modern-day Germans, to punish his people, the tribes, the modern-day tribes of Israel, where they are around the world. I put the chart up on the screen a few times to show you that. In fact, let's pop that up on the screen for just a moment while I'm diverting from the article for just a moment. Here's where the 12 tribes of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, presently are around the world. If you can see this chart I've got on the screen, full screen now. If you can read this okay, you can see that the United States, Manasseh, that Manasseh is the modern-day people of the United States, basically the basic stock of people. And Ephraim is modern-day United Kingdom, England, and certain parts of the United Kingdom. Dan, of course, is a separate tribe, and you can see where the other tribes are. But God says that if his people refuse to diligently hearken to his voice, if they refuse to obey him, he will use the Assyrians again to punish his people. And so, and as you look at the lack, you look at what the United States and England are doing in the way of not obeying its Creator. And one very good example would be the passing law to allow people of the same sex enter what is called marriage, but is not, according to God's Word in the Bible, it's not a marriage at all. Well, your country, your government, your courthouse, they hand you a piece of paper and say you two perverts are married. That's what God calls it. God calls if a man and a woman having sex, he calls it perversion, an absolute perversion. And God, who has a law that's a law of love and tells people how to be happy, people want to disobey it. They mock their Creator. And that's another thing. Our schools teach against our Creator. They try to teach this idiotic evolutionary stuff, and then ridicule anybody who tries to tell you the truth. But there is a great God, and he is the one who instituted marriage, and he's the one who, by having instituted it, tells you how it is. He tells you it's between a man and a woman. And to go contrary to that is disobedience to our Creator, and disobedience to our Creator gets us just exactly what God says in the blessing and cursing chapters. Instead of the blessings, which he promises for obedience, we get the curses, which he promises for disobedience. And if we continue to disobey, we get 7 times worse the punishment. And then eventually the pride of our power is broken. And then God says, okay, I'm going to use the Assyrians, who I've used before, to punish my people, to put them through warfare where 1/3 of them get killed, to put them through captivity where all but a few of that 1/3 are killed in captivity. And then God takes care of the other 1/3 himself with famine, and which will precede it as a warning to say, people, straighten up, obey me, practice my laws of love and happiness. But we're showing ourselves in a very terrible way, having set up a system whereby judges can overrule the majority in a given state, as has happened just this week in Alabama, and even in federal court, Alabama not allowing it, Alabama being forced or compelled by a federal judge, and that against the Chief Justice of the state trying to say, we're not going to do that, because that goes against the higher law of God, which the Chief Justice for Alabama wanted to help Alabama obey where the majority of people would go for that. But we got this incredible evil and thing happening. But even though the majority would go for it, the majority's not making the kind of stand that would cause things to be turned around, unfortunately. So in effect, people are going along with the sin that causes the punishments to come upon us. And God will use the Germans to do that. So they're being put into a position that they actually are, and they say, and they actually are uncomfortable with that position after having been greatly embarrassed with that lunatic Hitler and World War II, and having so many people become involved with that, and the country having had to sign an unconditional surrender. And then Germany split into East and West Germany because of Russia's involvement there. They're not comfortable coming into leading positions. But the God of this world is putting them into that position. God himself is allowing it because of the disobedience of his people around the world. I showed you the slide showing you where they are. Your own country being very disobedient to God. And when I say the country, that means the majority of the people in essence. And we get the leaders over us. We deserve that the majority, because of our obedience or disobedience, causes us to be given by God, he who puts these men in office. You only get to pick between a couple people. God makes sure that the ones that are put out there and who will be, quote unquote, voted into office, your vote makes a little difference in a certain way. God is going to work that out. So what people in a country deserve, they get, and what they deserve is the way they themselves are living. So we got bad leadership. We should check our ways. We're not obeying our Creator. And so God is going to allow the Assyrians back into position as leaders, even though the majority of the people in the country of Germany are uncomfortable with it. Back to this article. This is not comfortable for Germany, and certainly not for the rest of Europe. The Germans did play a significant part in the fall of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's government. Germany had been instrumental in trying to negotiate an agreement between Ukraine and the European Union, but Yanukovych rejected it. The Germans supported anti-Yanukovych demonstrators and had very close ties to one of the demonstration leaders, current Kiev mayor Vitaly Klitschko, who received training in a program for using leaders for rising, let me go back and read that sentence again. He received training and a program for rising leaders sponsored by the Christian Democrats, the Christian Democratic Union. Merkel's party, that's the heading, Merkel's party. The Germans condemned the Russian annexation of Crimea and Moscow's support for the Ukrainian secessionists in the east. Germany was not perhaps instrumental in these events, but it was a significant player. As the Germans came to realize that this affair would not simply be political, but would take on a military flavor, Germany began to back away from a major role. But disengagement was difficult. The Germans adopted a complex stance. They opposed the Russians, but also did not want to provide direct military support to the Ukrainians. Instead, they participated in the sanctions against Russia while trying to play a conciliatory role. It was difficult for Merkel to play this deeply conciliatory role, but given Germany's history, the role was not unreasonable. Germany's status as a liberal democracy is central to its post-war self-conception. This is what it must be. Therefore, supporting the demonstrators in Kiev was an obligation. At the same time, Germany, particularly since the end of the Cold War, has been uneasy about playing a direct military role. It did that in Afghanistan, but not Iraq. And participating in or supporting a military engagement in Ukraine resurrects memories of events involving Russia that Berlin does not want to confront. Therefore, Germany adopted a contradictory policy. Although it supported a movement that was ultimately anti-Russian and supported sanctions against the Russians, more than any other power involved, it does not want the political situation to evolve into a military one. It will not get involved in any military action in Ukraine, and the last thing Germany needs now is a war to its east. Having been involved in the beginnings of the crisis and being unable to step away from it, Germany also wants to diffuse it. Germany repeated this complex approach with Greece for different reasons. The Germans are trying to find some sort of cover for the role they are playing with the Greeks. Germany exported more than 50% of its gross domestic product, and more than half of that went to the European Free Trade Zone that was the heart of the EU project. Germany had developed production that far exceeded its domestic capacity for consumption. It had to have access to markets or face a severe economic crisis of its own. But barriers are rising in Europe. The attacks in Paris raised demands for the resurrection of border guards and inspections. Alongside threats of militant Islamist attacks, the free flow of labor from country to country threatened to take jobs from natives and give them to outsiders. If borders became barriers to labor, and capital markets were already distorted by the ongoing crisis, then how long would it be before weaker economies used protectionist measures to keep out German goods? The economic crisis had unleashed nationalism as each country tried to follow policies that would benefit it and in which many citizens, not in power, but powerful nonetheless, saw EU regulations as threats to their well-being. And behind these negotiations and the pricing of the euro, they saw Germany's hand. There was This was dangerous for Germany in many ways. Germany had struggled to shed its image as an aggressor. Here it was re-emerging. Nationalism not only threatened to draw Germany back to its despised past, but it also threatened the free world essential to Germany's well-being. Germany didn't want anyone to leave the free trade zone. The Eurozone was less important, but once they left the currency bloc, the path to protectionism was short. Greece was of little consequence itself, but if it demonstrated that it would be better off defaulting than paying its debt, other countries could follow. And if they demonstrated that leaving the free trade zone was beneficial, then the entire structure might unravel. Germany needed to make an example of Greece, and it tried very hard last week to be unbending, appearing to be a bit like the old Germany. The problem Germany had was that if the new Greek government wanted to survive, it couldn't capitulate. It had been elected to resist Germany, and whatever the unknowns, it was not clear that default in whole or part wasn't beneficial. And in the end, Greece could set its own rules. If the Greeks offered a fraction of repayment, would anyone refuse when the alternative was nothing? Therefore, Germany was facing one of the other realities of its position, one that goes back to the unification in 1871. Although economically powerful, Germany was also extremely insecure. Its power rested on the ability and willingness of other countries to give Germany access to their markets. Without that access, German power could fall apart. With Greece, the Germans wanted to show the rest of Europe the consequences of default. But if Greece defaulted anyway, the only reason might be that default works. Just as it had been in the past, Germany was simultaneously overbearing and insecure. In dealing with Greece, the Germans could not risk bringing down the European Union and could not be sure which thread, if pulled on, would unravel it. It was with this on her mind that Merkel came to Washington last week. Facing an overwhelming crisis within the European Union, Germany could not afford a war in Ukraine. U.S. threats to arm the Ukrainians were exactly what she did not want or need. It wasn't just that Germany had a minimal army and couldn't participate or, in extremis, defend itself. It was also that in being tough with Greece, Germany could not go much further before being seen as the strong man of Europe, a role it could not bear. Thus, she came to Washington looking to soften the American position, but the American position came from deep wells as well. Part of it had to do with human rights, which should not be dismissed as one source of decision-making in this and other administrations. But the deeper well was the fact that for 100 years, since World War I through World War II and the Cold War, the United States had a single rigid imperative. No European hegemon could be allowed to dominate the continent, as a united Europe was the only thing that might threaten national security. Therefore, regardless of any debate on the issue, the U.S. concern about a Russian-dominated Ukraine triggered the primordial fear of a Russian try at hegemony. It was ironic that Germany, which the United States backed twice as a hegemon, tried to persuade the United States that increased military action in Ukraine would not solve the problem. The Americans knew that, but they also knew that if they backed off now, the Russians would read it as an opportunity to press forward. Germany, which had helped set in motion both this crisis and the European crisis, was now asking the United States to back off. The request was understandable, but simply backing off was not possible. She needed to deliver something from Putin, such as a pledge to withdraw support to Ukrainian secessionists. But Putin needed something too, a promise for an autonomous province. By now, Merkel could live with that, but the Americans would find it undesirable. An autonomous Ukrainian province would inevitably become a base for undermining the rest of the country. This is the classic German problem, told two ways. Both derive from disproportionate strength overlying genuine weakness. The Germans are trying to reshape Europe, but their threats are of decreasing value. The Germans tried to reshape Ukraine, but got trapped in the Russian reaction. In both cases, the problem was that they did not have sufficient power, instead requiring the acquiescence of others, and that is difficult to get. This is the old German problem. The Germans are too strong to be ignored and too weak to impose their will. Historically, the Germans tried to increase their strength so that they could impose their will. In this case, they have no intention of doing so. The author concludes by saying, "It will be interesting to see whether their will can hold when their strength is insufficient." Friends, this article, Germany Emerges, is republished with permission of Stratfor. You can read the article yourself at stratfor.com/weekly/Germany-emerges. And, friends, one last story. We're going long tonight, but this is also important. Two special things for us this evening. Elie Wiesel's new full page in the New York Times and in the Washington Post, supporting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech on Iran to Congress scheduled for March 3rd. I want to read that ad to you. Now, and tell you up front, and I'll tell you again later in a moment in some scripture about it. The London Times refused to run this ad by Elie Wiesel. Now, the ad reads, let me see, can we get this a little closer here? All right, what you just saw was the whole ad with the pictures at the top of the ad. Of course, on a wide screen and that being portrait style, that makes the whole thing kind of hard to see. I'm going to zoom down now on just the bottom part of the ad where it's got the title and the picture of the author and the text of the article. Then let's see if we can just widen that out a little bit to fit the screen. And I'm just going to read that to you while this is on the screen, friends, or maybe I'll come back on screen with this in the background since I don't think you can really read this little tiny type. But here goes the article, the ad. The ad reads, "Many centuries ago," I'm going to come back with you as I read this, friends. "Many centuries ago, a wicked man in Persia named Haman advised, quote, 'There exists a nation scattered and dispersed among the others. It is not in our interest to tolerate them.' And the order went out to all the provinces to annihilate, murder, and destroy the Jews, young and old, children and women." Now, Iran, modern Persia, has produced a new enemy. The Ayatollah Khomeini has been as clear as his predecessor in declaring his goal: the annihilation and destruction of Israel. He is bent on acquiring the weapons needed to make good on the deadly promise. The disaster of ages past was averted, but the event is remembered in the holiday of Purim. Modern-day Iranians would naturally hate this holiday, Purim, because it is an in-the-face reminder of the plot by the Persians, whom modern-day Iran is today, to annihilate all the Jews. Back to the article, the Persians had this plan long before the modern-day Assyrians, which today is Germany largely, and some Austrians. The Persians, back to the article now, I threw in something else. The Persians, Iran's predecessors, had the plan to kill Jews long before the Assyrians, modern-day Germany, came up with the idea. All right, actually, that was an insert by me again. Now back to the article, friends. On March 5th, Jewish children in synagogues around the world will shout down the name of Haman when it's pronounced in the book of Esther. Just a side note, at Ambassador College, I was so thankful when one of our instructors, who was a full Jewish man, arranged for some buses and a sign-up for how many would like to go attend an evening of Purim at a Jewish synagogue nearby. Oh, I signed up for that, and at Purim, whenever the name Haman was mentioned, we were handed out these little toys. There's a name for them. I can't think of it right now. We were handed out these little toys that every time the name Haman is mentioned, you shake and twirl these little toys that are noisemakers. I should say noisemakers instead of toys. They hand out these noisemakers. Every time Haman's name is said, you whirl this little noisemaker and makes this whirling noise. You know, it's the equivalent of shouting down the name of Haman. Back to the article now. They understand a simple truth that at times eludes world leaders. Now, and he was referring back to the children that shout down the name of Haman when it's pronounced in the book of Esther. These kids, the Jewish people, they understand a simple truth that at times eludes world leaders. When someone in power threatens your destruction, you must loudly condemn him. On the day before Purim, the Prime Minister of Israel will address Congress on the catastrophic danger of a nuclear Iran. A side note, friends, isn't that interesting that the time that Prime Minister Netanyahu will be speaking in the United States Congress is the day before Purim? That's when he'll address the Congress on the catastrophic danger of a nuclear Iran. Old Persia, which produced this Haman who wanted to kill all the Jews way back, long ago in the Bible times. These are Bible times today, but, you know, in the ancient Bible times I'm referring to now. Back to this ad, not article, but this ad by Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel says, I intend to be there at that speaking that the Prime Minister will do before the Congress. And he asked in the ad, should we not show our support for what might be the last clear warning before a terrible deal is struck? Santayana wrote that those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it. I believe that those who deny history, specifically the Holocaust, are determined to repeat it. President Obama, Vice President Biden, distinguished members of Congress, I ask you, as one who has seen the enemies of the Jewish people, as I've seen those enemies make good on threats to exterminate us, how can I remain silent? As Queen Esther said when addressing her king, how can I behold the destruction of my people. Mr. Weisel says in this ad, I plead with you to put aside the politics that have obscured the critical decisions to be made. Surely it is within your power to find a solution that will permit Israel's prime minister to deliver his urgent message. Will you join me in hearing the case for keeping weapons from those who preach death to Israel and America? In traditional Jewish families, we close the Sabbath with the lighting of the Havdalah candle and a quote from the book of Esther retelling how danger was replaced by light and happiness and the blessing, and so may it be for us. Friends, that's the end of the ad. In the middle of the ad, though, below a picture, as you see here, of the author, is an invitation from him that reads, as I think I just read that part in the article, but it repeats here under the picture. Will you join me in hearing the case for keeping weapons from those who preach death to Israel and America? Signed, Elie Wiesel, Nobel Peace Laureate. Friends, again, the London Times refused to run the ad. There is a scripture. It's in Isaiah 9, verse 21. I don't have a slide to put on the screen, but I'll just refer you to that in your own Bible. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 21, which says, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh. In other words, the United States and the UK. The UK and the United States, the two sons of Joseph, who bear Joseph's names as if they themselves were one of the tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel. They're called half-tribes. And yet they carry the full name of Joseph, each of them. Ephraim, Manasseh, Ephraim, and they together, this verse 21 of Isaiah 9 says, and they together shall be against Judah. That's what's ultimately coming. That's a prophecy for the future. The United States and the United Kingdom will back away from helping its brother Judah, now called Israel, in the Middle East. The verse goes on, the remainder of verse 21 in Isaiah 9 says, for all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Friends, that's it for this Monday evening report on Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy on Tuesday here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying thanks for joining me, friends, and so long. Until next time, good night.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.